Is the CIA an army of individuals who have a license to kill? It's like Murder Incorporated, right?
Oh, are you kidding? The CIA makes the mafia look like a Sunday school class. I mean, this is the problem with what's actually happening in Afghanistan. Look, the CIA has done in this country, what they've done to us is unbelievable. Look at the terrorist acts that have occurred. The CIA behind most, if not all of them.
Former FBI chief. Here's a direct quote from him before he passed away, I think in 2011. The CIA and FBI are behind most, if not all, terrorism.
Okay, guys, welcome back to the Grimerica Show. We're going to be chatting with Richard Lighthouse a little bit later. Another suggestion from friend of the show, Clint P. They always tend to be home runs, too. This one is no exception. We chat about the universe blinking on and off and all sorts of other fun stuff. It's a hidden gem. Well, I think Richard's actually pretty prevalent, but I haven't heard him in a lot of places because I think he wasn't doing interviews for a while. So I think this will be first for quite a few of you. It's a first episode back in the igloo after, 3 weeks off almost. And here with me, the one and only, Graham. My Cavs now have a parody account Dunlop.
Who created
Actually,
that?
did you see the... I don't know. Nobody knows. It's a mystery. But we think they live in the UK.
Graham's Cavs from the UK?
Yeah. But did you see that Adams Oils joke? But Chuck Norris names his Cavs Graham and Dunlop.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, the calf thing is really spiraling out of control.
Yeah, it is.
See you teasing a couple picks.
I shouldn't have taken that pick after that hockey tournament. They were pretty ripped.
That was it. Yeah.
I figured if it's gonna happen, I might as well try and
might as well
play
start doing
along
my
and
leg
have some control
You should
over
really
it.
start just pumping them up. Just work out your calves 3 days a week, so they're just like.
I don't even do that.
You need to start squats.
I don't think so.
You don't even squatty potty. Oh yeah, you do.
Yeah, I do, but it's not working.
No,
No,
it's worse.
I think it's worse. So yeah, Richard Lighthouse was a good one. He's one of these guys that recommended a whole bunch of other researchers too. He's very,
we got it in 9/11, right?
Yeah, we got into that.
That's
yeah.
right. Yeah, this is one of those rare instances where we actually did this interview a month ago because of the break and everything. So Richard was great with his patience and waiting a month for it to come out and all that.
Yeah.
So big thanks to Richard for that. Yeah, I forgot we got into that 9/11 stuff too.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah.
And then next week we'll have Neil Kramer coming out.
And actually, I think he mentioned architects and engineers for 9/11, and he was a little suspect of them. And I saw that presentation at the Red Pill Expo from Richard Gage. Actually, I talked to Richard. He'll come on the show.
Oh, that'll be a good one.
Yeah, and it was still pretty good. I mean, it was all about...
Well, it's already June. I mean, we should try and line it up like a September.
Yeah.
Try and get a few people on in September to do 9/11. We can get Gage. I know Richard suggested a few other people. If the listeners have anyone you think we need to get on for 9/11, then maybe we'll do a 9/11 month this year.
Maybe, yeah.
Or half a month or something.
Yeah.
We'll see what we come up with. But It's always fun to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's still opening up a bit. I think people, with everything that's going on right now, people are realizing that, we're basically under a blanket of lies here.
Yeah.
And when the more and more you look at those buildings coming down and the way Richard's presentation shows it, regardless of what caused it, it definitely didn't fall from a fire.
Free fall.
Yeah. Just close to free fall.
What, that tower in London just completely burned. I mean, it's not the same structure, obviously, but it completely burned to nothing, and the skeleton remained.
Yeah, but you know well enough that if it melts from fire, right, it's just going to warp and sag. It's not going to disappear.
I would consider my input on construction, especially steel construction, as expert level. I'm not a structural engineer, but I have been building steel buildings for 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And not just on the grunt level either, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm involved in enough of it to know that there's no way.
That it doesn't collapse like that.
There's no way.
No.
And I would consider my opinion, maybe not expert, but as close to. It's a professional opinion for sure. I do what I do professionally at a high level.
Yeah. So that brings me to the Red Pill Expo, really, which was fantastic. It was great. So we'll do it. Darren and I are going to do a little rundown episode, like an extra.
We're going to do a teaser right now.
Yeah.
Why don't you take a couple minutes right now while I get into the moment?
Well, the Red Pill was obviously,
And then I'll do a couple minutes of vacation as a teaser, but we are going to...
we have enough for a full episode.
We're going to do a full bonus ep of us just hashing it. Actually, my buddy Kaz, I hung out with when I was out. He wants to come and join us for a bit on it. So
Okay,
he
cool.
did his first ever podcast. He did Friends to Know with me
Oh, cool.
while I was in Winnipeg.
Oh,
visiting
really?
him. And we were going to do it at his house, but it didn't work out. So we actually ended up just circling the city twice on the perimeter highway and doing
Driving?
Adam's podcast. And Adam had a migraine, so Adam wasn't even there. He got a migraine like 10 minutes before, so it ended up being me, Adam, Justin, and Nap.
Oh, okay, cool. Right on. So yeah, the Red Pill was good. I mean, obviously the theme was the Red Pill, and and they kept playing that Matrix clip over and over, but it was really
That must have got old fast. Even I can't even do it anymore when we do ones like that. You know,
Yeah.
I just can't. I used it so much for RPJ in the beginning.
yeah. But I mean, it really was a lot of examples of us living in a bunch of lies, right? From all different perspectives, right? From everything from, the mainstream media, people with personal examples of how the media has kind of fucked them over, to, a lot of science stuff, health and wellness. Obviously 9/11 was in there, and there was it was about 600 people there. It was really well organized.
Vaccines,
really,
cancer.
It was really well organized, and there was tons of nice people, friendly people. And you know what? You know what it ended up being a lot of? It was a little more political than I thought, but it was because there was an underlying theme of freedom, right? Which is interesting because it automatically kind of puts you on the other side of the mainstream media and sort of like the left, right? Which is sort of it sort of puts you on that other side of globalism, right? It can't sort of help. I mean, not that a lot of the guest speakers were about global solutions, but not in the same globalist way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, my argument is that you can't have a global society unless everyone's playing the same game. If you're paying people pennies on the dollar and the cost of living's pennies on the dollar in certain parts of the world, then it doesn't work. We're just turning parts of the world into slaves for other parts of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, we are the 1% as far as the rest of the planet's concerned.
Yeah. Yeah, but the problem is the money that it doesn't go to the poor either, right? The transfer of wealth doesn't really make it there. I mean,
No chance.
yeah.
It doesn't make it there in the first world. The chances that it makes it there in the third world aren't even slim to none. They're just not.
Yeah. So, anyways, what was your? So I got a bunch of guests lined up. Talked to a lot of different people. I should have some notes handy actually, but we'll talk about it. Talk about it more on the other episode. But all the speakers were very keen to come on the show.
You booked a couple?
Well, not solidly booked, but invited for sure.
Got email addresses?
Alex, I got a bunch of cards and stuff. Alex Jones was had his reporter there doing some live reporting. I was trying to get the T-shirt in.
Did you get it in there?
What do you call it when you get behind the camera?
I think it's photo bombing.
I tried to do a couple Grimerica photo bombs, but it wasn't working out very good.
Wasn't working out. You
Trying to
couldn't
keep
get
my
on
calves out of it and just get the shirt in there.
You're too short. We should have sent somebody taller.
Yeah.
You could
See me
have
jumping up and down in the
You could have
background.
went on Michael's shoulders. Next time.
So big shout out to everybody there. Met a listener there and his wife.
Oh, there was a listener there?
Samuel.
Samuel?
Yeah, that
Was
was
it Samuel
good.
L. Jackson?
No.
Oh.
No.
Did he recognize you?
No, well, he thought he saw me at a bar the night before, and I'm like, dude, I don't even drink, but I'll see you there tomorrow. I'll be in the shirt, so.
Oh, he seen you in the shirt?
Yeah.
There you have it. Maybe there's someone pretending to be you.
Maybe.
Wonder. Could be a thing.
So how was your vacation?
It was good, all in all.
Yeah.
Detached from work, detached from the podcast.
Was it good to
I was
get
still
out
in the
woods
chat
a bit?
But yeah, it was great to get in the woods. There's always the home drama. There's always a bit of that.
The family home drama.
Yeah, and then there was like, I was going there to be the MC at a wedding, and I left my suit in the hotel in Brandon the night before the wedding.
No.
Yeah. So I came up with this big ploy to fix it, which just ended up costing like $500 or $600.
What?
And still didn't end up with the suit. And yeah, I ended up borrowing a suit, which in the end I probably should have just done right away. Instead of, you go into that fight or flight fucking panic mode and you're making rash decisions and you're sending people places in the middle of the night.
Well, and you're probably baked with some great idea, great scheme.
And it was just like fucking, and then when it didn't work out, it literally took me like less than an hour to find a suit that fit me in town.
Yeah.
And for the money that I spent trying to get it there, that it ended up costing me, I'll get into the details of it on the bonus app.
Yeah.
But the money that I ended up fucking spending, I could have went in a little small mining town where everything costs twice as much as it's supposed to. I probably could have just went and bought another suit and had two. For $600, even a small town, you can get a suit for $600.
Did you borrow that hat too?
No, that's my hat.
That's your hat?
Yeah.
How come you never wear that?
I do wear it every time I go out. Whenever I wear my suit, I wear my fedora.
Oh.
Looks good, eh?
So let me ask you this.
So I didn't like that suit because usually my suit's more of a pinstripe, sort of plaid pinstripe sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that one was just solid black, so I kind of looked like a reporter or a Men in Black or something.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Only the people in the chat get to see pictures, though.
The chats.
That's why you need to be in the chats. I think I actually made the new link, grimerica.ca/chats.
Okay.
So chat doesn't work anymore because that was a fucking link that expired. I don't even know if this one's going to work for long.
What? The link?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. Every time I make a link, it keeps expiring.
Just for chats or links in general?
Well, I make a pretty link because the fucking actual link to join the chat is something fucking retarded that I couldn't actually just say out on the air. No one would remember it.
So you make the pretty link expires?
It's like Discord.
App. 80%.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I take that, copy it, put it into my website link generator. That costs like $5 a month. And I can basically just take any fucking link in the world, paste it in there, and make it grimerica.ca/whatever I want, and it'll automatically forward.
Oh, okay. Huh.
This is all stuff you should know one day, in case I ever don't come back from vacation.
Yeah, one day. So the chat, CHAT, this is the new chat, because the Google chats, we ran out of room.
We ran out of room, we did a purge, and we didn't feel about it. There was a story there with Bill. Bill the Shill started seeming like maybe he was CIA.
He was always there.
Some people might have panicked, and then everyone without an avatar got kicked out.
And then we figured out what Bill was, right?
Then Bill contacted.
So was it the story about the guy leaving his computer on?
So Bill's now back in the new... Yeah, that's him. He's now back in the new chat, and he took the B from the old chat and made it his avatar.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. But it doesn't look like the no avatar symbol in the new chat, so it's okay.
Right, exactly.
I'm going to allow this.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But I'm still standing to my avatar rule. If you don't have an avatar rule, within a couple weeks, I'll kick you out. I'll get Grimstake to do it.
What if your letter is like Z or X?
Hitler's right hand man?
Is that an avatar? If your name is Xavier, can you just have X? Like, that's cool enough. You don't want a bunch of S's in there, but if you're an X or a V, you could be okay.
Oh, if you just put a letter X? Yeah, no. Just pick a fucking avatar, dude. There's 1 billion pictures on the internet. I feel like Grimstake needs a good dark handle because he's the one who does the dirty work.
Grimstake's good enough.
He has to quit smoking.
Yeah.
I've threatened to pause the show and give out his phone number. He doesn't quit smoking.
So this is a perpetual chats that we have going on. It's pretty fun, actually. I'm in there browsing around every once in a while. It's pretty good.
Yeah, you definitely see some stuff in the chats that you're not going to see anyplace.
So let's just finish that Bill thought. So there's this B that was always in the old chats, right? Everybody was calling him Bill the Shill. We thought he was like this agent because he's always there. And then we find out later that his computer got left on downstairs or something. So he was like perpetually in there until he figured out how to. Meanwhile, Darren had kicked him out and everybody was like, I miss Bill. Even though he never said anything.
Now he says stuff.
Yeah.
It's better.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. So,
and you know what? It's fun is we addressed it in an intro that we had pre-recorded a month in advance. So it took like a month for the whole thing to play out instead of a week.
Yeah. That's the other part of the problem is that all the old links are in the old notes. So that's part of the problem with this podcasting and the time delays, right? So if people are listening to an old episode and then they follow the link in that note, it's going to take them to the Google chats,
people
right?
are still popping into the Google chats, but I put Grim in charge of the migration.
The migration.
Yeah. And I just dropped Slack. I think those guys still do like a chat on Slack all the time or something, but I don't know. I don't get into the Slack. I had to pick one.
Yeah.
And Discord seemed to work.
It seemed like we had to pick one fairly soon, so.
Yeah, I just picked Discord right away, you know. It just seemed to roll in better. It was working on all platforms.
Yeah.
The Slack bot was pissing me off. Anyhow. Yeah. So other than that, we caught a bunch of fish on the vacation for sure.
That's good.
But yeah, people do need to check out the chats if you want the backstage sort of pass, because that's where you'll see, you know, stuff that's not going on any other social media. Or the only place a lot of stuff you see in the chats you're going to see is in the chats. Yeah. And not only that, if we do anything live or anything like that, most of the time those are the people that are going to get, you know, you're just going to be more up to date on everything. Yeah. Chats.
Right on.
Grimerica.ca/chats, I think. If not, just go to Grimerica.ca/hangout. And then
No, just go to the chats. I can test that right now while you're talking if you want.
Yeah, well, whatever. If you go to the hangout, you'll get there. Anyway, check out Grimerica.ca/support, guys. Help us balance the books, get out of debt, Graham's debt. We got the Podcaster Pro. Piles on more debt. That'll be cool, though. That'll really streamline our traveling. Yeah. We'll be able to podcast from any place. Yeah. Start doing some more conferencing. Conferences are expensive, too, though. Actually, Red Pill's not, when you can drive, it's not bad. Yeah. Especially when you drive in the States and gas is like a third of the price.
Yeah, I definitely filled up in the States a couple times. Even with our exchange rate, it's still cheaper.
Oh, yeah. I think with the exchange rate, it's still half.
The drive through Montana was unreal, actually. There was certain parts of it. Like some of it on the freeways, you know, but I took the scenic road back. We took the scenic road back. I was with my girlfriend, and there was it's like you're driving on a huge plateau with mountains all over. And then the drive between Great Falls and Helena was just unreal, through like rolling hills and rivers and
nice.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, something about the rolling hills with the green, like half rock, half green grass on the hills, like just sort of small mountains and hills, like something about that. Like it feels like you could run up and down the hills, like
you could.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll come go through there because I'm heading down to the States soon. That was another thing. So check out Grimerica.ca/support, guys. It really does help. Someone in the chat today was thanking us for the show profusely and blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know, don't just thank us. You got to thank the 100 people or so that have signed up for a monthly of $1 or $2 a month. That really, if it wasn't for those people, the show wouldn't still be here today.
Yeah, it would just be too much.
It would just be too much expense and everything else by this point. Like the amount of money, you know, tens of thousands, 10 grand at least by this point we've done doing this thing. We never could have done it without these 100 or so people. And there's more than that if you count all the one-time donators, but without those people, the show would not be here.
Yeah.
So become one of those people over at Grimerica.ca/support. Of course, it doesn't even have to be monetary. You can help us by sending us content, sending us stories, synchros.
You can send a review, actually.
Review the show.
Like I've got an email here from the 1-star Marsman.
Back again?
Yeah.
Should we let him know that he can change his review to a 5-star?
He doesn't. Really? Can he?
Someone else did.
Really?
Someone else went back and changed it, but he had thought he was never going to listen again.
He's donated. Our 1-star reviewer has donated to the show.
Before the 1-star?
No, after the 1-star. Yeah. Huh. So I got to apologize to him because he was going to come on the Passport episode, and I fucked up. Legitimately, there's two Johns were coming on, right? Do you remember when we were in the middle of that and we were doing the Passport and it was coming down to the last couple callers and I got an email saying, oh, I'm crashing, right? So this is why we leave John the big, long voicemail right?
Yeah.
Because we thought he was still coming on, and meanwhile it was the other John that said, or no, it was that John that said he couldn't come on. So I totally mixed it up. So I felt terrible because it was kind of might not have happened anyways. We were like, well, if we can connect good, like, you know, but it wasn't, you know, super, you know, for some reason we both thought it might not happen. Anyways, I got some feedback from him on this. So this is how. So we've been emailing back and forth, actually, some really long emails, and had some great discussions on stuff. And I think he was a little rattled at that one episode with Randall Carlson, and I think we had Cyrus in there. You know, I think that's not our normal style. I think he's listened to a couple more, and maybe realized we're not so dogmatic all the time. So, anyways, he sends this email here. I finally listened to the show that I missed out on, and it is unfortunate that we didn't talk. I could have explained that at the time of the books and movies, hobbits still considered themselves to be subjects of the North Kingdom of Arnor. Do you remember that discussion we had?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Remember about Frodo and the hobbits and saying they don't have a king and all that?
I don't listen to that.
You're autonomous. What? You were the one arguing with me over it.
Yeah, but I don't.
And I was saying the elves and the dwarves have kings.
Yeah, I'm really just fucking with you when I'm arguing with you because I don't care about fictional creatures.
So he says, in the sense that nothing had officially replaced it, and they claim to have sent archers in the last battle in which it fell, until the king returns, was still an expression used up to the time King Elisir, that's Aragorn, our king, as they referred to him, did return. Locally, their nominal leader in times of need was the Thane, who was the patriarchal head of the Took clan at the time of the Battle of Bywater, and he's Pippin's father. Pippin himself later became Thane, east of the river Brandywine and Buckland, and
who's Pippin?
The master of... Oh, my God. He's one of the main characters.
Is he Frodo's buddy?
Yeah.
Pippin and Poppin?
Oh, my God. East of the Brandywine and Buckland, the master of Brandybuck Hall is the head. Elsewhere, there's the mayor of Michael Delving, which is the largely ceremonial elected office who presides at banquets. Frodo filled the role for a term, and his return was eventually Samwise, took over and was re-elected for many years. All in all, hobbits don't really fit into any of the categories we think of politically. An altogether reasonable and sensible arrangement. Very Hobbit-like.
Hobbit?
Hobbit. How's that for throwing down some nerd Trump?
Jesus Christ.
And then I'll continue. He says, are you familiar with Bernard Hayes' and his books, The God Theory and the Purpose-Guided Universe? Now, we've never talked about that, but
Where
I think
did he get all the Hobbit information?
Is
just that part of the books?
Yeah, oh yeah. That's all the lore in the books, yeah.
More than this, so he's read more than just the 4 that I read? Or is this all in those books?
Well, there could be a couple other supplements, like the Similarian maybe or something like that. But no, most of it's in there. You just got to, yeah.
Because I've read them.
I know. Well, you weren't really interested, obviously.
I was pretty interested when I was a kid. I really liked The Hobbit when I was a kid.
Yeah, me too. So he says, how about process?
The movie was actually super disappointing.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I pictured it different.
What about the Lord of the Rings movies?
That was pretty good.
Those are good, yeah. So how about process theology? I heard you talking about questions regarding Darwinian-style evolution. I think there's a lot to learn from some ideas in that regard. I had read Chaos years before and the idea of a system that is indeed random but sensitive to initial conditions. I don't feel qualified to make statements about my ideas, but a discussion would be helpful. What if the process initialed by a primordial, relatively unfocused consciousness is indeed random, but with initial conditions that would lead to the development of Loki, of consciousness, formed from itself and including material and non-material aspects. In other words, this primordial consciousness forms the founding factor and foundation of all, and hence can be referred to as the all. And once having initiated the process of self-actualizing through creation, becomes the ground of all being as described in Huxley's perennial philosophy, or as used in describing Brahman, or God, if you will. So evolution happens, and it is indeed random. The actual steps play out according to circumstance, but is rigged to produce the effect of consciousness experiencing itself through infinite variables. Haish draws some Kabbalah into the ideas of Ein Sof and Tzimtzum. Check it out. Be well. And that's interesting because I told him we were getting into the macroevolution, which we're about to record in like 15 minutes here. It'll be really interesting what he says.
This will be a good one.
Yeah.
Because I found a new creature.
Oh, boy. So thanks for the email.
A bear ale.
Yeah. Oh, boy. Oh, no.
Well, Darwin believes that whales evolved from bears.
Oh, come on. You've got the wolf and the dolphin and the bale and where?
The bale of bears? I figured you would have got a kick at Jordan Peterson saying that we separated from lobsters.
Oh yeah, I know. That's crazy. Like he wants people to take him seriously, and then he thinks we came from lobsters. I mean, or along the same path as lobsters. I don't know.
That is mainstream evolution.
Yeah.
So if he wants people to take him seriously, then that's probably
it's
what
not.
He should be saying.
I don't know.
That's what they teach in school.
I don't think that's. Aren't we beyond that? No?
I don't know. All the fucking similar DNA is hard to,
That doesn't mean that we evolved from one to the other. Where's the half lobster, half man skeleton? No. What?
You separate. And then you go...
Yeah. No, I know. I'm just sort of kidding.
So it's like a half lobster, half something else that turns into half this, half that, half this. I mean, by the time you get from here to here, you're so fucking many degrees away that... Billions. Maybe a billion. At least a million. I think it'd be more like a billion years ago. How long lobster's been around? We'll ask this guy.
Yeah.
This guy could settle some debates.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure.
I feel like you've picked him because he's on your side, though.
I don't have a side.
Yeah, your side's against me, clearly.
Against Wolfens, yeah, but not...
Have you talked to this guy about Wolfens?
No, I haven't talked to him about Wolfens.
So, okay, what else we got? I didn't play a single fucking jingle.
Well, I got a little synchronicity, which is probably, good from yesterday's, from the last podcast that came out.
Ugh. It's probably going to come through. I heard that through my headphones. Did it come through the mic?
No.
I think it might have.
What was it?
A fart.
I thought you were talking about...
Liam is an all-in believer in chemtrails.
What are you doing?
I'm just making sure it's working.
Come on.
I'm a rambling gram with synchronicities all over the web. And Aaron is skeptical about everyone and don't believe it yet.
All right, so I thought we'd just play a quick one here. We're running out of time, but I think this has to do with the episode last week, which was Dr. Eric Wargo, right, on synchronicity. So this is, So Graham, do you ever wonder if your thoughts turn things into synchronicities? A couple weeks ago, I was driving down the street in our very small town and saw someone who I know, but would call an acquaintance. When I saw her driving down the opposite way of the street, I immediately thought back to her having a heart attack several years ago, maybe 10 years back. Wondering if she had tried to turn her life around. Was she still smoking? Did she change her eating habits? And so on. Really, all of this was none of my business, and I was not even sure why I was thinking about it. Turned the page in the book, and last week, she had another heart attack and is still in ICU on a ventilator. I'm not sure of her expected outcome at this time, but it is all very sad. I can say I've had several incidences like this in my life. Here's another more recent example. Get this. I work in an office that has a truck bay and a very large garage door. I was walking through the garage area one day, and I had thought to myself, man, that would be really horrible if that door fell down. Sure enough, that same day, the giant garage door fell. Luckily, no one was in there, so there were no injuries. I can't help but wonder if some of these thoughts are manifestation or psychic ideas or what. How would you be able to decipher the difference? I think it would be conceited of me to assume that I manifested these things, mostly because my powers of manifestation suck in every other avenue of my life. Specifically, my concern would be that both of these incidences were negative and I have no ill intent for anyone. These aren't my normal thoughts. They just seem to pop in my head at random times. Can you give me some perspective? Thanks, Brittany.
Nope.
Hey, you can.
I can.
Dr. Eric
Ripple
Wargo.
stick.
No, what would he say? Now, I don't know if Brittany listened to our last episode or not.
Ripple before the stick. Ripple before the stick. Now, yeah.
So he would call it precog, right? That she's picking up on her emotional. She's picking up on her emotional.
She already read that door was going to fall.
What?
She already knew the door was going to fall. That's why she thought of it.
No, she thought of the emotional reaction. She picked up on the emotional reaction of the door falling, right?
No.
That was his. That's where the precog happens,
But where's
right?
the emotion? There shouldn't be any emotion.
But the door fell.
But not near her.
But there's her emotional. It doesn't have to be like.
So
you
think, because she was feeling fear as she was walking under, it tapped into the future.
Yeah.
Of her reading or whatever, knowing that door fell down.
Or for example,
I think it could just be a ripple stick too. I mean, it really is only a couple of hours.
Well, let's say
there's probably not that much of a difference between a ripple stick and a synchronicity when you start describing it the way Eric Wargo describes it.
Exactly. Yeah. So he would call that more of a precog reaction or whatever, right? Or I think he's got a more technical term, but.
And then there's always a chance that it just like leaves an impression, or I don't know.
Or maybe she's just that powerful that she's manifesting it.
Could be, like you say, as soon as you start thinking of shit, that's the thing, you know?
We'll keep those thoughts positive.
Yeah. Power positive thinking. I have that book.
Do you?
The book Trump read when he was a kid. Helped him manifest his billions.
Are you still doing your
I've been on holidays.
Well, you manifested your holidays.
That's right. Very good.
Right on.
And to manifest some more. That reminds me, before I sign out, I wanted to show it. So I had my trip backwards. I actually have to go straight down from here into Idaho or Oregon or Montana for the eclipse on the Monday. And then after that, I want to head to Northern California to check out the big old trees. Then I want to head up the Oregon coast, at least to Seaside, maybe even to Seattle, and come back that way. And I'm going to do some hotels, but I also want to bring a tent and stuff and do some camping. So I'd rather not just be picking places on the internet. If we have people that have been there or know of some good campsites or know of, some places kind of along that route. So picture like straight down from Calgary over to Northern California, up to Seattle, and then back to Calgary. If there's any must-see
camping
spots, or maybe
or even
some
hotels
hidden hotel
too.
gems you know about, or whatever you think, maybe some spots that I should be thinking about to watch the eclipse, send that over to Darren@Grimerica.com.
You haven't chosen your eclipse spot yet? I thought you had
I have a spot, but I'm still open. I'm still open to better spots.
Right.
And I think a bunch of these fucks are meeting up from the chats too, but I'm pretty sure they're all too far from me. Are you going to drive down and check it out or what?
No, I don't think so.
On the Monday?
No.
You could be back to work on the Tuesday.
What?
Maybe.
How far down do I have to drive?
Probably how far is Boise? Hey Siri, how far to Boise?
It looks like Boise, Idaho is about 837 kilometers.
That's not too bad.
That's
like
and I think
9 hours. That's Boise, Idaho's only that far?
Yeah.
That's not too bad.
So, yeah, you could probably take off the Monday, and then if you fucking burned it back, like you might not get a ton of sleep that night, but you could be back at work by the Tuesday.
I'll think about it.
Probably worth it. Well, you've seen one though.
I'm getting recommended to another conference down in, actually, I think it's in South Dakota. Is that far?
Well, it's right under North Dakota, which is probably about as far as the Paradigm Symposium was.
Yeah, that's a little ways.
That's a probably 24-hour drive.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be driving that far.
Each way.
Yeah, we'll see.
But flights are cheap if you can get to fucking States.
Yeah. Anyways.
We need somebody who has a plane. Someone who, like, works for an airline that has buddy passes so we can start sending Graham to conferences.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. Anyway, we better jump into. We got an interview in like 4 minutes. So thanks for listening, guys. Yeah, we're back on our weekly schedule. So check out Grimerica.ca/support. Check out Grimerica.ca/news.
You already ran.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Enjoy the chat.
Okay.
Dr. Richard Lighthouse.
Oh, yeah.
Is it doctor?
Yeah. No, I don't know.
It is today.
Excited to have Richard Lighthouse with us tonight. He's published more than 100 ebooks, most of them free, some of them very technical, and a lot of it's been about, you know, the sort of centering around this scientific discovery of that our universe literally blinks on and off. And it's called the Lighthouse frequency, and the harmonics of this frequency can be used for time travel and faster than light travel and parallel universe and all this kind of stuff. It's really interesting. He's got a master's degree in mechanical engineering from Stanford, and he's previously worked at NASA.
Awesome.
And it's really interesting stuff, especially after we've done a couple episodes on this type of mind-blowing thing. I've been looking into...
it ties into so many previous episodes.
Yeah,
maybe it does or maybe it doesn't, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll talk to him about all this stuff. So thanks for coming on the show, Richard. It's great to have you.
Thanks, guys. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate being a guest on your show.
It's one of those topics where I started looking into all your work, and I was listening and reading some of your ebooks, and I don't even know where to begin. There's so much going on, but immediately I kind of like to know, and we don't have to talk about this yet, but I'd like to know, like, what are the implications of this research, right? And we get into the difference between, you know, our current scientific dogmatic paradigm and what you're talking about here with the Lighthouse frequency and different electrons. I mean, it's just so much interesting stuff.
Like after all the stuff near the end of looking into it, I got caught up in all this light travel stuff, and I'm just fucking fascinated.
Yeah.
That's where I got stuck, for sure.
Okay, well,
so
maybe
maybe for the beginning here, maybe if you could just kind of give our audience a quick rundown of what we're talking about in some simple terms.
Sure, that's a good place to start. A little background. Many scientists, going back for decades, have been looking for a solution. There's between quantum mechanics and other theories, there's a gap that, that physicists have not been able to explain, and they're looking for a solution. Einstein spent the last 20 years of his career trying to understand the nature of time because he was certain that that's where the gap was. And there have been a number of theories that have been proposed, some of them very complex mathematically, and no one has been able to put together a simple explanation that would tie it all together. And two interesting things that Einstein said during the later years of his career. One was that if the idea that scientists came up with to explain all this was not wildly absurd, it probably wasn't going to go anywhere. So the reason he made that statement is because he found out through years and years of discussions that The standard sort of analytical inside the box thinking just wasn't working. And so he realized early on that it had to be something that was really outside of the box. And yet at the same time, he was also quoted as saying that he was confident that the math that explained the universe was elegant and simple.
Yeah.
In fact, he said it should be so simple that I can explain it to a child. And I hope that will be one of the takeaways for your listeners this evening, is that some of the ideas that I'm expressing, you'll find that they're so simple that, in fact, you can explain them to a child. And they're not complicated at all. One, certainly Einstein's simple equation, E equals mc squared, I'll touch on that a little bit. But so the theory that I have proposed, and it is not my original idea, I have simply provided the math for it. Mm-hmm. The basic idea is referenced in the back of several of my ebooks and comes from some New Age material known as the Seth material. And he is quoted many times, and I've got a number of his direct quotes that date back to as early as 1964, where he stated very literally, your universe literally blinks off and on at a very high rate. And I took that idea and I said, well, how could that work mathematically? How would you explain that? And I worked on it for several years, trying to understand how the pieces of the puzzle would fit together with that simple idea. And what I came up with was actually a subharmonic and the primary frequency. The primary frequency is 1.039 terahertz, and this can be proven experimentally. And I will give several examples that will demonstrate that this is a real solution and something that we've seen in actual practice. And one of those examples is at the World Trade Center on 9/11. Mm-hmm. The harmonics of this frequency can be used for time travel. And for those listeners that are familiar with the pictures on drjudywood.com, specifically figure 63, if you'll look on her website, there's an image, an overhead view of the World Trade Center complex, and World Trade Center Building 6 has cookie cutter holes punched through it. It's plain as day. It's the first thing you notice when you pay attention to that photograph. And there's really no rational explanation other than the fact that infrared lasers were used on that building on 9/11. Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot of disinformation to try to denigrate that theory. And basically, I've published a couple of papers describing how that laser works. One of them is called Technical Description of the Infrared Laser Used on 9/11. Mm-hmm. It's available on my website, rlighthouse.com. It's free. But basically, at a harmonic, this is not an ordinary laser in the same way that a nuclear bomb is not an ordinary bomb. Mm-hmm. This laser is extremely powerful and basically reduced the entire World Trade Center buildings to dust in less than 8 seconds. So when I say powerful, there's no exaggeration there. And it does this by rapidly aging the molecules in the laser's path. And there's a video, a very short video clip that's called Figure 38A on Dr. Judy Woods' website that clearly shows a very large steel beam still standing that was from the corner of one of the buildings, and it gets caught by the laser, and in midair, several hundred feet into the air, it does not collapse and fall, it does not melt, it simply turns to dust in midair, and you can watch the video clip of it.
Yeah.
So you can almost see that whole sort of center core columns turn to dust.
That's correct. There's a massive dust cloud that ensues as the building collapses, and a lot of folks have tried to describe this with claims that are not reasonable. And really, looking at the pictures, you don't need an advanced degree to figure out that those circular holes in World Trade Center Building 6, they're all about the same diameter, just look like cookie cutter holes in the complex that go right through the steel and concrete. And by the way, jet fuel does not burn through concrete and steel. It doesn't get hot enough.
Yeah.
Especially not after it's fallen a half a mile.
That's correct.
Yeah, and there was really a lack of rubble there, right? When you look at you can see.
Yeah, there's pictures of the day that you can see some street level things.
Yeah.
That's right. There are a number of very good images that Dr. Judy Woods has put together, and I strongly recommend that website for those that are curious. But I'm using that. That was a segue to explain that the physics for this is real. The harmonics of this frequency, and in my opinion, the harmonic that was used for this infrared laser is 1.039 times 256. And that turns out to be about 265 terahertz. That's in the infrared spectrum, and that would be a perfect frequency. It would have to be very precisely held, something that would be very difficult. So discussing that technology of how they did it is a whole nother level of discussion.
Yeah.
But I'm using this as an example that this technology is real and this is how it works.
So does it resonate with that frequency that you're talking about? So that, there's the Lighthouse frequency, and if you can find something that creates a resonance effect, is that what it is?
Well, the way it works is all of the harmonics are already there. It would be sort of like plucking a guitar string.
That's what I was thinking.
And then touching your finger to any of the harmonic points after you've plucked the string, so those harmonics will come right out. But the reason you would use one that was in the infrared spectrum is because that's what an infrared laser would power through, is that particular frequency. And the other reason they would use it is because it's invisible to the eye. It's not within the visible spectrum. So that's why no one caught that or noticed that. But Dr. Wood was careful to determine that the building collapsed faster than free fall and gravity, which again is another thing that defies explanation under ordinary physics. It's like, what was pushing down on the top of the building to cause it collapse faster than free fall? That doesn't make sense. In the description that the government's official explanation, they claim that the building collapsed due to structural failure in the I-beam
or some shit.
Pancaking, and it literally would have stopped on each floor. So it would have been a very slow fall had that been the collapse method.
Yeah, all the clips would have had to shear off.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Steel,
it's ridiculous. I work in construction of high-rise buildings, so I can call a spade right off the bat.
Yeah, that's good. And a lot of people have noticed that. So
actually, it was Judy Woods' work that kind of turned Darren down the rabbit hole again for 9/11. Like you weren't really.
I had just ignored it. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd ignored it for a while.
I wasn't down the rabbit hole at all when it happened, and then I just didn't look into it. And then I ran into Judy's videos, and then I was just like, okay.
Yeah.
And then so I opened up the 9/11 rabbit hole like 10 or 15 years after everybody else, and then it just consumed me for like 6 months.
Yeah.
It's really a fascinating study, and unfortunately, it does implicate our government and probably the intelligence agencies as well. There's a number of good websites that go into details about specific
that's fake
specific
news,
things.
Richard Lighthouse.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I said, that's fake news, Richard Lighthouse.
Well, if I could, I'll quickly name a few people that I consider to be experts on 9/11.
Sure,
yeah, absolutely. We'll put them in the show notes.
Yeah, these are all these websites we talk about.
I was on that website the other day, the architects and engineers, and something. What is it? It's up to like 3,000 or 4,000 or more by now.
Wow.
Yes, there are quite a few people that have kind of self-educated themselves on a lot of the details, and that's certainly very helpful. Some of the people that I would recommend, Dr. Morgan Reynolds, who's a professor emeritus at Texas A&M, he has a website called nomoregames.net, and he was actually in the Bush administration. He was an economics advisor to the Bush administration. And I strongly recommend his website because he's got these slow motion clips of the planes flying into the building. And what's so compelling, and you can watch his videos where he describes it. If you watch the view, it was taken from what appears to be about a mile away. It's clear that the video take was photoshopped because the plane itself, there's a flagpole in the foreground, in the near foreground in the video, and there's a guy wire that's strengthening the flagpole. So that guy wire is about 10 feet away from the camera, and the plane in the background hitting the tower is at least a mile away. The plane in the video flies on the wrong side of the wire in slow motion. It's clearly a fake model.
Wow.
Okay, I encourage listeners to check that out. It's at nomoregames.net. You can watch the fake cartoon airplane fly on the wrong side of the wire. Okay?
Yeah, we'll link to that in the show notes. It's actually 2,876 people have signed it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then offline, if you're in touch with any of these people and you think they'd be interested in coming on the show, do put me in touch with them.
I can do that, certainly. So some of the names that I can recommend: Dr. David Griffin, he's a university professor. Dr. Stephen Jones, a physics professor. Dr. Kevin Barrett, he's a professor.
We've had Kevin on, I think. Hey, Darren?
Yeah, we've had Kevin on, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And
what was Jones? Dr. what Jones?
Dr. Stephen Jones.
Stephen Jones, okay.
He's a physics professor.
Okay.
That seems to be the one that could bust it open still, you know? Well, I might just be naive, though.
No, but the implications are huge because, we had Joseph Farrell on and we talked about the different levels of this conspiracy, right? There's like, the base level, and then there's the ultra secret level, which is kind of what you're talking about, where, maybe there was always planes planned on, hitting it, but only a certain amount of people at that ultra level knew that that these buildings would be dustified, right?
Or that they would come down at all.
That they would come down at all. So it implicates, this sort of breakaway civilization that people call it, or like this elite crowd that are using these technologies and these weapons for whatever purpose, right? That's where the real interesting part is for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the other pieces of information that I found that's very compelling is an attorney named Michael Springman, and maybe you've heard of him. I would recommend him for your show as well. He's an attorney in Washington, D.C., and he's got a book out that's called Visas for Al-Qaeda. And his history is that he was stationed in Saudi Arabia with the State Department, where he was head of the American Visa Bureau. While he was stationed in Saudi Arabia, he was repeatedly ordered by the CIA to issue visas for terrorists. And he strongly objected and argued about it many times. And he would come back, they'd threaten his job, they'd threaten him. And unfortunately, these visas became the 9/11 hijackers. He had filed numerous complaints with his superiors, and eventually they fired him from the State Department because he wouldn't let it go. So it's clear that just from what Michael Springman is saying, that the CIA had planned this from the beginning.
Yeah.
And again, his book is called Visas for Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, and people are always asking, where are the whistleblowers? Well, there is lots of whistleblowers out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, there's lots of whistleblowers out there.
Another one that I'd quickly point out with the World Trade Center is a former FBI chief named Ted Gunderson. And if folks have not heard about him, I strongly recommend him. I consider him a heroic icon. The man had a great deal of courage to do some of the things he did. Former FBI chief. Here's a direct quote from him before he passed away, I think in 2011. The CIA and FBI are behind most, if not all, terrorism.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Think about that for a second. This guy was the number 3 or 4 person in the FBI. He was head of the entire Southwest Division for the FBI, a chief, which is very high level. And this is a direct quote from him. The CIA and FBI are behind most, if not all, terrorism. And he knew. He had the rank, he had the security clearances to know. So I encourage listeners and readers to look him up. He's got a lot to say. There's a number of good videos that he's put out. He actually went around the country touring 10, 15 years ago with several people just to try to get the word out about what was going on, and had his life threatened many times. He was stalked and harassed continuously. And he kept going. The guy's got a lot of courage.
What about the the site that Darren was talking about, the architects and engineers one? Like, do you recommend that as well, or is that a different? I mean, I know there's some different sort of groups of 9/11, where it gets kind of either too conspiratorial or not conspiratorial enough, and there's still a lot of not infighting but disagreement within that whole community.
There is, and the site that you're referring to, I have visited that site. It's got a lot of controversy on it. Sometimes it's hard for me to separate the wheat from the chaff. There's certainly a lot of experts there,
yeah,
and a lot of folks with advanced degrees that have spent a lot of time studying it. It appears to me, and this is my opinion, that there's a great deal of disinformation on that website because they have attracted a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And so it appears to me that the intelligence agencies that are focused on the disinformation have compromised that organization, unfortunately. If you're able to sort that out, I think there's still some good information there, so I wouldn't dismiss it entirely.
That's a good point. So I was living in Vancouver, and I heard about this guy who was developing like free energy and levitation called Hutchison. I think we were actually trying to get him on as well. And now you talk about him quite a bit in your research as well. And is that related to what happened at 9/11 as well, or is that a completely separate kind of technology?
Actually, it is related, and that's thank you for bringing that up. It's related in that what Mr. Hutchison was on to is I've described in a few of my papers, in my opinion, what he was doing was combining lower frequency radio frequencies with light X-rays. And by combining those frequencies, what happens is you'll get an interaction of the waves. And you may have noticed this if you've ever seen like a swimming pool that is not perfectly square or is broken up into parts. There will be sort of an inlet passage where the waves can get through, mm-hmm. and you can see the effect when a ripple effect goes through there, how the waves combine. And so I'm trying to give you a visual image of what happens when two different frequencies combine, and they produce I forget the name of the term for it, but they can combine and create and hit certain resonant frequencies. And one of those resonant frequencies I'm proposing is a harmonic of the Lighthouse frequency. Yeah. And that's what happens where he's able to get levitation of objects like bowling balls. And he's got videotapes of it. Unfortunately, it's not reliable. He has been asked repeatedly to demonstrate it on command, and you just can't do that because he can't predict when he's going to get the right combination of those two entirely different frequencies such that it hits that resonant frequency, the harmonic.
Yeah, I think his place got raided when I was in Vancouver, that his whole apartment condo got shut down.
I heard about that. Apparently, some of the folks didn't want that information getting out, and he was starting to get a little too popular.
Yeah.
Could that, so on a quick sidebar, could that be used as something that's responsible for like the Fibonacci sequence in nature?
It's possible, and it's interesting you bring that up. A lot of folks have tried to describe the relationship between those different frequencies in terms of the Fibonacci sequence, and that's certainly a possibility. I haven't seen the exact math for that yet, as it applies to the things that Hutchison has done. But that's an excellent question that I would like to see somebody look into. So the math is there, and it should be demonstrable whether or not that hits one of the harmonics. But again, that is some additional physical evidence that I'm proposing as an explanation of how these harmonics work, and that I am not simply just providing random equations to explain something, but there is some physical evidence to back this up, that this is a real solution and there's real physical phenomena.
Yeah.
One more example I'd like to give along those lines very quickly is a gentleman by the name of Colonel Philip Corso, and I've referenced him several times. He's the author of a book that came out back in the late 90s called The Day After Roswell. Mm-hmm. It got a lot of press attention, and he did a number of interviews, including 60 Minutes and a lot of local broadcast stations. And one of the statements that he made, again, these videos were recorded around 1997, and the Roswell crash occurred in 1947. And Colonel Corso claims in his book that he was put in charge of reverse engineering all the technology that they could out of the vehicle. One of the statements that he made later on now, after he's retired, is that we were never able to figure out how the propulsion system works. We only know it has something to do with blinking. Okay? The reason that statement is so compelling is it ties right in with these other physical pieces of evidence that strongly suggest that our universe is blinking, and that the harmonics of that frequency can be used for time travel and faster than light travel.
So that to me also like screams like my TV is blinking and my phone is blinking and I can see the blinks when I eat mushrooms. Doesn't that, like, that just screams digital or simulation or holographic to me right away? Is there any correlation to that, or is there?
Well, this particular frequency, and I understand what you're saying. This particular frequency is so high on the frequency spectrum; it's terahertz. It's trillions of cycles per second, and it's in an area that scientists have had difficulty explaining for many years. And in fact, they call it the band gap, because it's above the frequency of microwaves, where we know there's lots of physical phenomena, particular molecular vibrations and that type of thing. And then there's a big gap, and then it jumps up to infrared spectrum and frequencies of light. But in between that is this band gap that scientists have had difficulty explaining, because there's no physical phenomenon occurring there. And that's always been very puzzling, because our entire frequency spectrum has natural phenomena of just about anywhere you look. And here's this big gap in the middle, and we're going, what's going on there? Why is that gap there? Well, it turns out there is something going on there. 1.039 terahertz is the blinking frequency of our universe. And that could be one of the reasons why there's very little physical phenomena close by that frequency. I want to try to give listeners a sense of, because you bring up a good point, it's like, how can I relate to that? Help me explain that perceptually. What does that mean to my senses? Well, one of the ways that I have tried to explain that is, imagine a ceiling fan. If you've ever used a strobe light on a rotating fan and caused the fan blades to look like it's stopped, maybe some listeners and readers are familiar with that.
I've seen that effect. I find sometimes if you get even the fan in the right light, you can get that effect where it looks like it stops spinning.
And that's correct. And what is happening is pulsations in either the light itself, for example. It could be from the household current, or if you've got a true strobe light, you can dial in the strobe until it hits the right frequency, and it'll make the fan blades look like they've stopped. Well, that's kind of what happens with this blinking frequency. If you go faster than the frequency, nothing happens. If you go slower than the frequency, nothing happens. It's like tuning in on your radio dial. If you don't hit it precisely, you don't get any music. And so I've had a number of people ask me about that, saying, well, I know we've seen femtosecond lasers, and they're used, and there's no time travel effect, and that's clearly much faster than the terahertz that you're talking about, and that's correct. But again, it's like tuning into a specific radio frequency. If you don't hit the right frequency, you get no music.
So then if you get that exact frequency, you just kind of slip into some sort of purgatory.
No, he just slips into a different universe, parallel universe.
Is that
probably,
what it would be?
Right?
Into
where
so
the time
there's two universes?
That's how you get through time travel and faster than light travel, right?
Yeah, I get that. But I'm just like, what is it? It must just be two then, right? The this and the anti.
Well, okay, that's a good question. Okay, so let me try to explain it from the way that Colonel Philip Corso did in his book. And while he was trying to study the vehicle that they had recovered, or actually this was just prior to that. This was in 1957 in the desert, I believe in New Mexico, where he was the base commander at, I think it was White Sands. Don't hold me to that, but it's one of the military bases in the Southwest. And he had taken one of the pilots, and they had flown over one of the remote areas of the base, and he noticed a shiny object on the ground that was clearly on the ground, and it wasn't an aircraft. And he said, let's go back to the base. And he had some concerns about what it might be, so he got in a Jeep and drove out there. And again, this is a pretty far drive out there, and it was already turning dusk. When he came upon the grounded aircraft, and I'll try to quote it just the way he did, but again, it's in his book, which I strongly recommend. He said the vehicle sat on the ground and was pulsing, and that it appeared to be transparent at times and seemed to fade in and out of our universe. Now, think about that. So what's happening there compared to what I've described with this frequency? If you don't hit the frequency just right, and sometimes you're a little slow and sometimes you're a little fast, what would it do to a vehicle? It would make it appear as though it was fading in and out. And at times it would appear transparent. That would be the perfect description. Are you following me?
Yep.
Okay. So one of the sort of the images that I describe in my free ebook that's called Faster Than Light Travel, The Basic Mechanics, and again, that's free on ourlighthouse.com. These free ebooks are also available on Amazon, Smashwords, Apple iBooks for folks with iPhones, and Barnes & Noble, as well as many other websites. So these are free, and I've done that deliberately because I'm just trying to get the word out. I'm more interested in seeing this technology developed and used and try to get that benefit, because there are some very significant benefits that go with this technology.
Your current employer is okay with that?
I had done this all before beginning my employment with my current employer.
Okay.
I work for an engineering and construction company, so we're involved.
I thought you were in the energy sector.
Right now, I'm in an engineering and construction company that works for energy companies.
Okay, yeah. Okay. You've got a degree of separation.
No, I think that's one way of describing it, yes. So I have worked for some big energy companies in the past, doing business development and done a lot of international travel. So that's something I enjoy, but what I'm doing right now is more practical and involved with engineering and construction.
Yeah.
So let me quickly jump back to how this works, because you brought up a good point of what happens when you hit that frequency. So one of the ways that I can explain this, and I tried to do this in this book that I'm talking about, Faster Than Light Travel, The Basic Mechanics, the second paragraph where I talk about what is fifth dimensional space, because that's very important to understanding what happens. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, when you synchronize a vehicle, the electrical signal with the blinking of our universe, which again is beyond the perception of our senses. It happens so fast you can't perceive it. And a simple way to understand that is we all watch movies at the movie theater, and those projectors are typically around 30 frames per second, but you don't see the blank spots in between those frames when it's moving at 30 frames per second. In fact, you don't think that it's a fixed image. You see a moving image, and for all intents and purposes, you think it's moving. Well, it's really not. It's a fixed image that's moving at 30 frames per second. So you can imagine at 1 trillion frames per second, you simply would not sense or perceive any gaps or the fact that you're seeing individual slices of a reality that's constructed. And I know that's difficult to get your arms around, but you have to think about it for a minute. So what happens when you synchronize with this particular frequency, one of the harmonics, the first harmonic is about 2.078 terahertz. Now, what you can think of is what happens when you synchronize with this frequency is that you're basically straddling realities, okay? Your vehicle goes into what could be called suspended animation or a stasis, okay? You're literally straddling in between universes. You would still perceive in and out the physical universes that you were trying to leave and an alternate universe or fifth dimensional space. Now, fifth dimensional space can be thought of as Grand Central Station, all right? That's a good analogy because when you want to travel anywhere, if you're in New York City, back in the day, you want to get somewhere, you go to Grand Central Station. And you can get anywhere from there. You can go to any city in the country. You can go to foreign destinations. You can get to the port. You can take the train to get on an airplane. And that's a good analogy of what fifth dimensional space is. So once you step into it, you are simply one step away from anywhere in any universe, any time period, or any dimension. Is literally one step away once you're in fifth dimensional space.
So what would it look like?
I gotta say something. What if we could reach that state naturally? Like, what if we could synchronize?
I was actually going to ask if there's any research between psychedelics and it harmonizing, because I mean sometimes on psilocybin you can almost see the resonance, and on DMT you might just be in the fucking other side.
Yeah, but like, what if that's creating a resonance? Exactly. Like, or if you're NDEs or OBEs, like, what if you can do it while you're lying in bed meditating? Like, what if that's how people actually reach those other dimensions? Maybe even lucid dreaming. Maybe you're in that state of you're synchronized with that blink.
Here's how you bring up some good examples, and here's how I would explain that in kind of practical terms. And I'll use Seth's terminology here, okay? The way he explains it is all of time is simultaneous. These ideas about backwards and forwards of time are simply a distortion because in reality, all of time is simultaneous. The massive present moment contains all periods of time. If you hold out your arm and wave it around, you are literally moving your arm through a dinosaur that was standing there 70 million years ago in our terms. But the reality is, it's happening right now. Okay? Try to get your arms around that, because that's going to bring up a lot of questions like, hey, won't the molecules and the atoms conflict? How come, they don't, bump into each other? Well, what does an atom or a molecule consist of?
Mostly
it is
nothing.
That's correct. It is 99.999% empty space. Perfect point. So how does that work? Your subconscious mind actually perceives all of these realities, all of these periods of time simultaneously. If you were to try to experience that with your conscious mind, you would be overwhelmed. So what happens between your subconscious mind that senses and experiences all of these realities simultaneously, your ego filters all of them out except for one. The primary function of your ego is to keep you focused in one reality. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that experimenting with certain chemicals and I'm neutral on the subject. I'm not trying to take a position on that. I'm simply saying what you might be doing in such a case is asking the ego to step aside a little bit and letting that information come in from the subconscious mind.
That's really interesting.
So the realities are always there. They're always present. And by asking your ego to step aside and let go its rigid grip of your conscious mind and its singular focus, it allows that information to come in through. So this also explains why telepathics and psychics can see the future, because they're simply using the subconscious mind to sense what is always there for everyone. It's not an unusual talent. Everyone has that ability. It simply requires a relaxation of the ego to let the subconscious perceptions pass through to the conscious mind. So that's probably a longer answer than you were looking for, but I hope that helps a little bit.
That's good, because that lines up really well with our interview with, was it Eric Wargo? Dr. Eric Wargo? Because he explains synchronicity, and kind of the method that time is not linear. It's all happening at the same time. And these little synchronicities are the reason they stick out to you is because the future reward, or it's tied to something. It's precognitive. Yeah. For lack of a better term.
You're precogging the emotional response to that thing as opposed to the event itself.
That's right.
Yeah. That's a good point. And I think an equivalent way of explaining that is saying that all of time is simultaneous. One of my favorite quotes that I like to use that Seth had mentioned is, "You have no idea the difficulty of explaining time to someone who must then take time to understand the explanation." And I thought it was very clever because we're so accustomed to thinking in terms of backwards and forwards, past and future. And Seth made it clear that time moves not only backwards and forwards, but inwards and outwards. It is multidimensional. So there is no singular timeline. There are an infinite number of timelines and probabilities available to anyone. And the past can be changed just as easily as the future or the present moment. Nothing is fixed. All of those timelines and all those probabilities are always available to you.
Well, it's funny.
There are no limitations there.
And the way you remember the past is probably through your ego a lot of times. So it's fixed in, your ego fixed the past as well.
That's a good point. Your ego wants to see one timeline. It wants to think in singular dimensions. And that makes it easy. It makes it easy for decisions. It makes it easy to keep you focused within one reality. But that doesn't make the other realities any less valid or real, because they are just as valid and real.
Is there any sort of evidence that any sort of wildlife is able to tune into that at all? Because they might not have an ego.
Maybe that's why Sasquatch can disappear.
Well, that's an excellent question. I think the way I would explain that is Seth's many comments along the lines of everything possesses consciousness, and I mean literally everything. There is no such thing as something without consciousness, and by consciousness I mean self-aware. Everything is self-aware. Even a single atom is self-aware. So everything, including animals, they possess consciousness. Although science and religions have tried to denigrate animals and claim that they have no soul or they have no self-awareness, Seth would say exactly the opposite, that they in fact do have consciousness, and they are very much self-aware. Now, they don't have the beliefs and the ability to logically deduce things that we possess, but they are consciousness and they are self-aware.
So maybe we should go back to where you were before I interrupted, about you're straddling the worlds, I guess, or you're standing. You've made it through that dimension, let's say, and you said you're one step away from all these different dimensions or worlds or whatever.
That's correct.
So you're continuing on from there, which I would assume is something about how this propulsion or how this technology would get you from one to the other?
Correct. So when I mentioned the analogy to the fan, what we're doing when we synchronize with a harmonic of this blinking frequency, and the first harmonic is 2.078 terahertz. The reason we can't synchronize with the fundamental frequency at 1.039 terahertz is because in our terms, you have to think about this. If you've ever seen a sine wave, a mathematical sine wave, you can picture that in your head. above that horizontal axis, you see a wave, and we'll call that matter. And below the x-axis, we'll call that antimatter. So we see this sine wave that's moving at 1.039 trillion cycles per second, but we only perceive that portion, and we're only aware and have physical bodies for half the cycle. So in our terms, at 1.039 terahertz, that frequency literally does not exist because it doesn't have a complete cycle. It never has a complete cycle in our terms. So the only way we can access it is through harmonics. So if, for those listeners that have a degree in math or engineering or physics, they're going to be very familiar with that sine wave, and it will make sense that this fundamental frequency, if you tried to find it on a signal analyzer, if you zoomed all the way into the highest possible resolution, what you would see is a gap that would suddenly appear. And this isn't possible because it's a pure tone. There wouldn't be a gap on a signal analyzer except in theory, because it doesn't exist in our terms. It's a frequency that literally does not exist. But the first harmonic for that frequency, when we synchronize a vehicle to that frequency, we step into fifth dimensional space, and there are a lot of amazing things that can happen when we do that. We can travel through time. One of the things that Colonel Corso mentioned, and has been mentioned by a number of books, is that the intelligence agencies refer to the beings that were recovered in the Roswell vehicle, they call them P-24s. Why do they call them that? Because they were not aliens. They were not from another planet. They were future humans. They were from a probable timeline that exists 24,000 years in our future. One timeline. And so they referred to them as P-24s. They are also have met, apparently, and there are a number of books that discuss this, where insiders and whistleblowers have come forward and said, yes, we've had discussions with P-45s, P-52s, all of these people being from our future. Some of them are here to help us. I briefly mentioned that because it emphasizes the point that the vehicle was actually used for time travel, not space travel, although it is capable of space travel as well. So what happens for these guys when they step into that fifth dimensional space, at that point, the amount of electrical charge that is put on the vehicle determines where you end up, okay? Now, when we're doing long-distance travel, there's two things involved. One is what engineers and physicists will call the right-hand rule. And if you hold up your right hand and curl it into a fist and point your thumb out, this is the direction that a vector takes when, how can I explain this? It's the curl of an electric vector. So if I am stirring a group of electrons in a right-handed motion that are floating, and this is just an analogy. If I've got a bunch of electrons that I'm stirring in a pool of water, there will be created a vector force in the thumbs-up direction. Now, why that applies to our spaceship is because that tells us the direction that the ship is going to go in our terms, okay? So while you're straddling these two universes in fifth dimensional space, you're in a stasis or a suspended animation, and you want to point the vehicle in the correct direction, and you want to give it a precise electrical charge. Now, I didn't touch upon this prior, but I'll touch upon it now. So what can we say about the nature of long-distance travel and time travel? Is that one, time and distance are illusions, okay? That's what we're realizing by understanding that our universe blinks on and off. Both time and distance are fundamentally illusions because our universe blinks on, and then when it blinks off, everything collapses to a single point, okay? One point. Everything exists in a single point for a fraction of a second.
So could that explain the Big Bang? Is that like the first blink, or is that just us being able to randomly zoom in on one blink, or?
That happens more than 1 trillion times every second. We return to a single point.
Time.
All the time. This happens all the time. There is no beginning and there is no end. In those terms, when I'm saying there was no such thing as a Big Bang.
Yeah, it's gone. It's out of
There's no
the
such
picture.
thing that there is, as religions have stated for thousands of years, there is no beginning and there is no end. They couldn't explain it mathematically. Here's the mathematical explanation. Our universe literally blinks on and off 1 trillion times a second. There is no beginning and there is no end.
So this ties in well with the electric universe theory, I'd imagine?
It does, because that single point is what Seth describes as the electrical universe. And all consciousness, all memories, all matter is represented in this single point as a vibration or a frequency. Everything.
That almost sounds like the, what was the cloud they used to talk about? Or the Akashic Records.
Yeah.
Everything in those terms, those would be ideas. And those ideas would be expressed as a frequency or a memory contained within this single point. And everything that has happened in any period of time, future and past, any probability, any parallel universe, any physical dimension is contained within that single point. If you can get your arms around that's truly a staggering amount.
Yeah, it's completely different ways to look at the universe, right? Completely different. Like instead of a beginning and an end and an expansion, which they're saying is not happening, it's basically always there. It's almost, I guess, I don't know if it would be infinite or not, and the light, the thing is blinking off constantly and creating. Yeah, I don't know. Can you get into how we know that it's blinking? Like, is that to do with electrons themselves, or how do we know that the universe is blinking at that speed?
Well, there's ways that we can test it, but the physical evidence, there's several pieces of physical evidence, such as the infrared laser that was used on the World Trade Center. That's one physical example. Colonel Philip Corso's experience and reverse engineering of that vehicle, indicating that it was powered by blinking, it had something to do with blinking. That's another physical example. The third physical example is the Hutchison effect. When you combine radio frequencies with light X-rays, that combination randomly produces in an environment, it hits resonant frequencies that are those harmonics, and then you get things like levitation or rapid aging occur. And the distinction, it would be a whole other level of discussion to go into the distinctions between when do you get rapid aging and when do you get molecular time travel. But it's an interesting discussion. For those readers that are interested, you can find several of my free ebooks on ourlighthouse.com, and I go into some of those details.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So what was it about the electron then that you're talking about, or can we still, I'm still curious as to how the universe is blinking. Like, is it? Yeah, I don't know. I'm still stumped at that part of it.
Okay, it is difficult to get your arms around it, but it explains and brings together so many gaps in our understanding of physics and quantum mechanics. It just puts all of the pieces of the puzzle together. It's like they suddenly all fit together. It explains how we have not been able to unify the four fundamental forces of gravity, electromagnetism, the strong force, and the weak force. And in my technical paper, where I have discussed mathematical solution unifying the four fundamental forces in nature. In that paper, I describe how those four forces are digital versions of a single analog force. So the electrical universe is analog, and it just the simple math that describes it is called analog QAM, or quadrature amplitude modulation, which is the same math that is used to describe AM radio. It's that simple. Digital QAM, or digital quadrature amplitude modulation, is what can be used to describe the four fundamental forces. So you have an analog force in an electrical universe, and every time the universe blinks on, you get four components of that analog force that appear as our four fundamental forces in a four-dimensional universe. In an 8-dimensional universe, you would have 8 fundamental forces. In a 16-dimensional universe, you would have 16 fundamental forces. So the logic follows very naturally. That blinking, some of the ways that you can try to describe it, again, the fan analogy, the strobe light, where you synchronize with that blinking frequency, is one way to perceive it. One of the ways that we can prove that using current technology, I've referred to on the main page of my website at rlighthouse.com, and here's the simple experiment that we can do. In 2007, a group of grad students at UCLA did a very unique and very important experiment that's called time stretching. And I've referenced the particular technical paper they've done. And since then, there have been a number of people that have gone much faster to sample things at much faster rates. But these grad students were able to sample something at much faster than the capability of any computer. And the way they did that was, if you've probably played with Play-Doh once or twice, or maybe your kids have played with Play-Doh. If you can imagine taking a piece of flat Play-Doh and imprinting it with a sine wave, if you can imagine that, and then taking the Play-Doh and stretching it with 2 hands, stretching it out horizontally, what would happen to that frequency? That very fast frequency now becomes a much slower frequency by stretching it out. And by doing that, now we can take our much slower computers and processors and we can analyze that frequency. And before, because that frequency was so fast, our computers couldn't analyze it. Okay? And the mathematical theory that goes with that is called Nyquist-Shannon theory. Now, Nyquist and Shannon were 2 brilliant mathematicians. Nyquist did his work in the 1920s when he was trying to analyze telegraphic signals. And he wanted a way to try to break a code, basically, was what he was doing. And later on, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Shannon came along, and he figured out that to analyze any frequency, regardless of what it was, he came up with a mathematical proof that showed as long as you sample it at double the rate of the frequency, you can crack any signal and break it down into its components. So if I have a 1 terahertz signal, if I sample it at 2 terahertz, I can perfectly reconstruct that frequency in all its nuances. And everything that's captured within, whether it's a code or music or language or all of the above, it will be contained within that frequency, and I can break it down into its components and figure out what it is. And so he did a very important mathematical proof that showed as long as I sample that at least 2 times the rate, I can decode anything. And so we use that now today in signal analyzer theory. And a signal analyzer is the piece of equipment that they use in electronics labs and at university labs to analyze different frequencies, particularly very high frequencies, because there's lots of things that happen at the molecular level and the atomic level that happen so fast that we have to sample them at very high rates, or we can't break it down and figure out what happened. So signal analyzers can analyze these harmonics that I'm talking about. And in fact, they've gotten so good at using this time stretching method that many university labs are already doing very similar experiments. So I've published this with the hope that I can get someone who's got the equipment, and if there's anybody out there listening that has access to electronics and can review the paperwork and set up this simple experiment, what you'll find is, to prove the point that the universe is actually blinking, if you sample that frequency at 2.078 terahertz or faster, you will find that all 4 fundamental forces vary just like a sine wave. That's the key that will prove the universe is blinking, because you're never going to be able to visually see it. You're not going to see it with your eyes. But what you can do is measure the change in the electromagnetic force or the change in the gravitational acceleration that will vary just like a sine wave. And the math for this, again, is very simple. And that will be the proof that our universe is blinking. And so I've suggested that, and I hope that someone who has access to some good lab equipment might try that experiment in the near future and confirm it. So
nice, yeah, that answers it.
That was maybe a long-winded answer for.
No, that's good. How is there room? How is matter created, or does matter exist in the with this model, or is it
mass or matter?
Matter.
That's a good question, and it shows that you're thinking about it, because these are some of the same questions that I had when I first tried to get my arms around this idea. Matter and energy. What we hear from thermodynamics, if you take thermodynamics as a college class at any university in Canada or the United States or anywhere else for that matter, one of the first things they'll teach you in thermodynamics is matter can neither be created nor destroyed. Unfortunately, it's not true.
Wrong in 1945, didn't we?
It's not true, and there's going to be a lot of folks that have a problem with that, but if our universe is truly blinking on and off, then matter and energy are constantly created and never destroyed. So because each time the universe blinks on and then off, the antimatter universe blinks on, and our universe of matter literally does not exist for half the cycle. So literally, you have no eyes, no body, there is no house, there is no planet, there's no nothing. Nothing exists for half of that cycle. It's not that, some people have suggested that, that means that all of the matter particles turn into antimatter and we experience that side of oppositely charged particles. No, that's not correct. That's a separate universe. We never experienced the universe of antimatter. And that also demonstrates that matter and antimatter particles will never meet because they don't exist at the same time. In a blinking universe of matter and antimatter, matter and antimatter particles can never meet. And that's you want that situation to exist, because when you combine, if there was ever a situation where matter and antimatter met, you would have a big explosion. It would be a problem.
Yeah, it sounds like a problem. Sounds like crossing the streams.
It would be like crossing the streams. That's correct. So fortunately, we will never, there is no situations where we can experience that. Now, there will be a lot of physicists and scientists that have a problem with that statement, because for many decades, I think since before World War II, scientists have posited that an antimatter particle called the positron, that is the opposite of an electron, exists. And unfortunately, it's not true. The positron is one of 16 probabilities that are ordinary matter of an electron.
The positron could be the same as the neutron, or this kind of reminds me of when we were talking to Neil Adams.
It's an interesting discussion, but it kind of requires a little bit of background in particle physics. And if there are some folks with a little bit of background, I encourage you to read two of my ebooks that are free. One is called The New Standard Model for Elementary Particles, and the other one is called The First Periodic Table for Elementary Particles. And I go into a greater detail and explain how digital QAM, or 1024 QAM, literally describes the elementary particles that make up our universe. It is simple math. It is so elegantly and beautifully simple, it will overwhelm any physics major that's been studying Yang-Mills theory for many years. The math is so simple that even a child can understand it. It's basically a mathematical pattern. It requires no addition or subtraction, no multiplication or division. It is simply a mathematical pattern. And interestingly, it's the same math that we use to send a Wi-Fi signal or a cable TV signal. It's the same math.
So does that mean that consciousness could be somehow being picked up like a Wi-Fi?
That might be one way to explain it. I would say that your consciousness is analog and matter is digital. So your consciousness always exists, even though matter does not. Does that make sense?
Like the electric universe.
Like the electric universe, correct. So your consciousness always exists within the electrical universe as a frequency and expresses itself as a frequency. And every thought that you express is expressed in the electrical universe as a frequency and permanently stored there. It is never lost. It never disappears. It doesn't lose anything. It is an infinite amount of storage within that single point. Infinite. It is literally infinite.
And they charge you $2.99 a month.
And if you want additional storage, there's an additional storage fee.
Perfect. So have you looked into any of? Has your research lined up with you looking into any of the growing Earth theory or the growing planets or anything like that?
I have not delved into that. That is an excellent question, and I would like to look into that at some point.
It kind of reminds me of if you're checking out the back catalog, check out, it was 160-something with Neil Adams. And it's not his theory, but he does a good job of articulating it. And, it's interesting because he talks about pair production and pair production going on with, and for some reason, I thought he had the same take on positrons, but I could be mistaken.
So, I wanted to talk about that. So positrons, you're saying that is really just one of the various types of electrons, like a possibility of one of the 16 types of electrons?
That's correct. What the math tells us, and I am, my mantra is show me the math. I am a kind of guy that says, I love to hear stories about this unusual phenomenon, or this guy saw this, and particularly William Tompkins, who is, I think, a very credible gentleman with a lot of experience. He started during World War II and is an engineer, I believe, by training. But he's got a number of videos out, and he described some of the things that he's seen with his top secret clearance that I think are truly amazing. But at the end of the day, I always say, show me the math. I'm not going to believe it until I can see the math. And so when I came across this 1024 QAM field and understood that it described all of the elementary particles in a form of a periodic table, similar to the periodic table for chemical elements, all of them are lined up and related perfectly in a math table. So there's 1,024 elementary particles, and I know physicists are going to have a problem with that. No, we've only discovered 17. Well, that's exactly the same discussion that was had in the middle of the 1800s about the chemical periodic table. They couldn't understand why so many elements were missing until they mathematically laid it out and understood what a mole was, what a molecule was, and understood the true nature of the atom. Then they could mathematically line up all of these elements and go, hey, there's a gap here, there's one missing. But there were so many scientists at that time said, no, we got them all. We've figured them all out. We're very confident that there's no more chemical elements that we've skipped over. And there were a number of important discoveries into the late 1800s and even the early 1900s where when they finally understood the math, they went, wait a minute, there's one missing here. We got to figure out what this is. And so once you get the math, you find out how many particles, in this case, are missing. And there's quite a few. We've skipped right over a good number of them. And I think one possible explanation is that, and I've had someone comment to me, nah, they don't do sloppy physics at CERN over in Europe. Those guys are very, very meticulous. They're very accurate. There's no way we would have skipped over any particles. Well, if those particles didn't break down from a proton or lead, then yes, we could have skipped over them. If they break down from dark matter, then yes, we would have skipped right over them. So what I'm proposing is the reason we've skipped over so many particles on this 1024 QAM table is because they are the breakdown particles from dark matter. And since we're only basically using protons and lead as targets and accelerated matter in the accelerator beam, that's why we've skipped over so many of these particles. But the math is something that I trust, and I think something that a lot of physicists and mathematicians will relate to. I trust the math. And I don't remember who said it, but there was someone a good number of years ago that said that math is the language of God. It never lies. It never needs translation. It is pristine just the way it is. And so it's something that once you've spent a lot of years studying math and mathematical formula, you learn to trust it. And when it tells you something that you go, wow, that intuitively doesn't fit, you learn to trust the math, because the math will steer you in the right direction. But anyway, so that's my quick summary of folks that are interested in elementary particle theory. I encourage you to look at 1024 QAM, because the simple math explains the periodic relationship between all the elementary particles. And I've published a couple of ebooks that are free and available on my website or Amazon, Smashwords, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, etc.
Wow. So are you saying that some of these other types of electrons are missing particles then that we'll find eventually?
Yes. And I probably didn't answer your initial question. So the way the math works for every particle, and we've identified 17 of them right now, mostly through these accelerators and through CERN, the latest being the Higgs boson. What I'm stating is that each one of these particles has 16 probabilities associated with it.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
So
and the math is simple math.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Does that mean the next time the Higgs boson could be discovered as something different?
It means that it has 16 probabilities. Each time the universe blinks on, the probabilities are imposed such that a different probable version of that Higgs boson can appear. Now, there's one particular Higgs boson that appears the majority of the time. So it's like a statistical bell curve, a very steep bell curve. And those 16 probabilities are mathematically expressed as 4 charges times 4 spins. Right now, we're aware of 4 charges, but we're only aware of 3 spins. So we still have 1 spin to discover, and I've written a technical paper about it. There's 1 spin that's missing. So mathematically, there are 4 spins and 4 charges, and that equals 16 probabilities. And the math proves that. So, So it's I love the math because it's so clear about what it's stating. And so we have probabilities, and that also explains the anomalous magnetic moment. Again, this is kind of a detailed discussion that particle physicists like to have, where they cannot explain the magnetic moment of particularly the muon particle and other particles. They can't explain why. They know how to calculate the magnetic moment for one of these particles, and when they capture one and measure the magnetic moment, it's not what it's supposed to be. And so they keep saying it's an anomaly. Well, the fact is, if they would sample it at 2.078 terahertz, they'd find out there's no anomaly. Because when you sample it instantaneously, each time the universe blinks, the calculation will precisely match the magnetic moment. There won't be any anomaly. And the reason that they're getting an anomaly is because part of the time, one of those other probabilities of 4 charges and 4 spins appears, and it's got a different magnetic moment. It's the same particle mass, but it's got a different magnetic moment. And that's why there's an apparent anomaly. It's beautifully explained. It's simple math.
So then these ones we haven't discovered yet are just even less probable?
That's correct. Just like chemical elements have probabilities of appearance, like palladium or platinum. If you go stick a shovel in the ground and dig up, you're not going to find an ounce of palladium or platinum in there because they're rare. Well, so are some of the probabilities of these different particles. When we capture one, it's likely going to be one of its main probabilities. And we can isolate that for one cycle of the universe, and then the probabilities are again imposed, and you get that particle can reappear as the same particle mass, but it can have a different charge and a different spin.
And your consciousness is probably affecting it too.
That's a great point, and one that would require a whole different level of discussion. But yes, you are correct. Consciousness affects matter. And we can segue quickly into that because it's a beautiful point.
Yeah, because it makes me wonder if a scientist that is expecting to find a certain result or is kind of stuck in a certain place if their own consciousness is affecting the results, especially on the small scale, because as soon as you start getting into
spins,
quantum, everything starts to break down.
It's a good point, and you can actually explain that mathematically, which is, of course, for me, something that I would love. So, and this explanation comes from Seth. Energy and consciousness and matter are one. E equals mc squared, Einstein's famous equation. The equal sign in that equation is consciousness. Consciousness and energy and matter are one because you cannot separate consciousness from the realities that it constructs. It's a beautiful equation, simple, elegant, and it explains the relationship between consciousness, energy, and matter. And it's so simple.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I was wondering about, do you remember our episode, Darren, with Craig Flowers about time? Like time as being a particle? Like he came up, so I wanted to ask you about sort of more of your path on how you came to wrap all this information up. I know Seth had a part of it. We've had a couple different listeners on as well that have had sort of like, for lack of a better word, a download, some kind of experience where they've been able to write down what they're getting from some other source, right? And one of our listeners came up with his sort of theory of everything, and it was basically like four equations of the four things, like energy, time, space, and matter. And you just switch the equations around, like energy equals time, space divided by matter, matter equals space, time divided by energy, so on. Like time equals energy and matter divided by space. And it was interesting because you mentioned time as being a particle that would speed up or slow down depending on how close it is to mass or matter. Does that resonate with you at all?
I haven't read or seen that before. I think the way that it's possible. I think the way that I would explain that is that time and space, or space being distance, are temporary illusions that exist in a physical, digital, or discrete universe. And in the electrical universe is analog, where energy and consciousness reside permanently.
Digital, yeah.
And so our physical universe exists for a trillionth of a second. It blinks off, and then it's newly constructed. All the particles that are there did not exist the prior blink. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is there any way
it is literally newly created. Everything that we perceive and sense things to age and pass through sequential time, when in fact what we're seeing is simply one timeline out of an infinite line of probabilities. And we're choosing to focus on this sequential time, but it's not required. And in fact, when lots of folks that like to meditate and have experienced or explained altered states of consciousness, and they claim, some of them claim that they can experience multiple timelines simultaneously. Well, that might be explained as experiencing a more natural state, or a dream state that is more natural than experiencing a single timeline in a physically constructed reality.
Yeah, with your ego running the show.
With ego sort of keeping a rigid grip on allowing only one reality to pass through to your conscious awareness.
Yeah.
And that's certainly one way to explain it. So yeah. I'm not familiar with this gentleman's work, but I think I would probably explain it a little differently.
Yeah.
So then are these like, is there a chance that these persuasion people and these life hackers and these people that are, or somehow
affirmations and stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Is there some way that can be tied into this universe being reconstructed, a couple trillion times a second?
It certainly could. It certainly could. It's and again, this is I have to emphasize in our terms. I always need to put that in capital letters behind anything that I explain, because we are describing the universe and how it exists from a perspective of being within a single timeline and a physical discrete universe. So everything we describe is going to have limitations. But if we If we express things from the subconscious mind or from the electrical universe, those limitations and boundaries disappear because all of time is simultaneous. And from the fifth dimension, all that time is available to you simultaneously. It's one step in any direction that you want to go. There's no distance. There's no time. You simply step to where you want to go.
So I wonder if that would mean that past lives and things like that could just be you just tapping into that because it's concurrent.
And it seems past,
it's
but
not
it's really
you, but it's just concurrent crossover.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're doing an affirmation, Darren, that you want something, right? Like you've been doing lately. If you did an affirmation, maybe you're putting it out there. That is energy. That's a charge. That's something. That's a frequency, and you're putting it out there into this timeline, or this not timeline like linear.
Yeah,
and then maybe it comes around.
Internal.
It comes around, and when one of these blinks in it, and that's how it kind of there's something there for it to grab onto. Yeah.
Just grab it.
Yeah. So Richard, how did you put all this stuff together? Like, obviously not just from your education and reading Seth's material.
Well, I love math, and I've always been very interested in the space program. I spent a number of years working for NASA and NASA contractors, and so understanding sort of aerospace technology and a lot of the equations that go with it, I think was kind of the direct.
What's that? Sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Were you airbrushing photos over there?
No, I can't say that I've ever done any airbrushing of photos, but I have heard that does occur.
Were you losing moon landing videos and stuff like that? Hiding those away?
No, unfortunately, I didn't get to dabble in that. But so I would say my background of sort of my father was also in the space program, and he worked very closely with a number of the astronauts at the Johnson Space Center, and so we got to see a lot of that firsthand. The patches and the multi-day missions. And my father would sleep in his office at work for 3 days while he was supporting mission control, and so me and my brothers got to kind of see that firsthand. And a lot of our interests lie in the space program and aerospace technologies.
Well, it sounds like you've had a pretty solid education, mainstream interest in space and all this. Do you get a lot of flack from people that you're sort of, into the, this technological, this hidden sort of technological society, and you talk about UFOs and 9/11 and all that stuff?
Well,
do you even care? Like,
I'm less concerned about what people think. I'm more concerned with finding solutions, finding answers. Yeah. And I think any true scientist would take that attitude as well. They're less worried what. Look at Einstein's hair. You really think he cared what anybody thought about him combing his hair? I'm pretty sure he just didn't care what anybody thought.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of people's careers have been ruined over talking about stuff like this, right? Or even just breaking away from the mainstream narrative at all. You can only go so far, it seems, before you get pushed down a little bit.
Well, I think that's certainly true in academia. But what I would say is if you've got the math to back it up, you've got a starting point. And once you've got some compelling mathematical equations, it's real difficult. And I've found this out recently. Having extended discussions with folks at from big name universities, that are appalled that we would bring up anything related to a Roswell subject or something like that. And I'll say, here's the math. Let's focus on the math. What problems do you have with the math? And they honestly struggle to try to break it down. So the math is the segue, and show me the math. As long as you stick to that mantra, the criticism becomes very different.
I get that. Yeah. See, my thought is the implications are huge because of what you're talking about. That using this technology is finding solutions. Like if we could, somebody's flying around in this craft with these propulsion systems, with this energy, you know, and we're still burning fossil fuels and
great grandkids.
You know, like we need these free energy solutions, right? So there's big implications here.
Absolutely, and I someone who's very credible, in my opinion, that knows a great deal about this subject, Dr. Stephen Greer. If you could ever get him on your show, he'd be an amazing guest. The guy has more knowledge.
He's hard to get.
I'm sure he's what they call a good get, right?
Yeah.
Amazing guy. And his new movie and book that have just come out, literally just this past month, Unacknowledged. I highly recommend it. If you haven't seen the trailers, you can order the book. I probably sound like a commercial for the guy, but he has invested so much of his adult career into disclosure. Yeah. And getting some of these technologies out, and he's built such a compelling case. It goes way beyond anything that I could say here. If you're a newbie to the subject, I strongly recommend just start with Dr. Stephen Greer. He's got lots of YouTube videos. His movie that's free is called Sirius.
And Unacknowledged, too, is the new one. I've seen the new one, and I actually really liked it. So by the time listeners are listening to this, they might have heard me do a review of Unacknowledged on an intro. So,
yeah, that's great. I'm glad that I can't wait to see the movie. I hope it'll come out to local theaters. But I applaud Dr. Greer's efforts. That it's been in a long uphill struggle to get some of this information out. Yeah. And the backup that he has is just over the top amazing. Yeah. 600 eyewitness accounts of people with top secret clearances, advanced degrees, all the academic credentials that you could ever hope for. These guys have got the background and the history to credibly state what the claims that they're making. So I applaud his efforts.
Yeah. And the good thing is, for once, it's not just this little underground film. Like, you go into iTunes now, and under new releases, it's right there. So I think it seems like it's going to get a lot more mainstream attention, hopefully.
Yes, absolutely. I'll look for your review as well. I'd like to hear what you say about it.
Yeah, it was good. I was surprised.
Grimerica has mixed reviews.
We have a slight Greer controversy going on and off on the show sometimes.
For 4 years running.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with a healthy discussion.
That's right.
I always encourage that.
Yeah, that's right.
I always go down to name calling. That's my problem. So I guess that's just your primary focus right now? Is that just like shouting from the rooftops to anyone that'll listen is trying to get this out there?
I would say that's my main message. That's a good point. My main message is an important scientific discovery. Our universe literally blinks off and on at 1.039 terahertz. And the implications of this are staggering. It will affect all of science. It will affect our religious beliefs. It will affect the way we view our present lives. And the technologies that it will bring on board are stunning to a degree that we haven't even considered. This will make physical time travel a reality and not just a discussion for science fiction. The results of this working with this frequency and this technology will dramatically alter our world and our standard of living to an amazing degree over the next 20 years. So I hope that some of the listeners out there that have backgrounds in engineering, math, and physics will take hold of it, do their own research. Don't take my word for it. Yeah. Do the math for yourself. I've presented the math. Work it out for yourself. Yeah. You don't have to take my word for it. Yeah. So I encourage that.
Is it something that would be easier to visualize? Like, have you considered maybe doing a little Kickstarter or something for a little documentary or something like that? Or is it pretty hard to visualize?
No, that's an outstanding idea. I would love to do something like that. I've never approached that, so I'd probably need some expertise or some help in that direction. But that's an excellent idea.
Yeah, I'm sure we've got a bunch of listeners that are experts in it. We're not very good at that stuff ourselves, but I'm sure we've got listeners that are We seem to have a listener that's pretty good at everything. So, I mean, maybe someone will leave in contact that can help you out.
Yeah.
And in both regards.
Yeah.
My contact information is available on my website.
Yeah.
So if you have some information or some suggestions, I always welcome comments and suggestions, positive or negative.
Yeah.
I welcome the feedback.
That's great. Well, that's what I love about most of our guests. They're open to criticism, and you're saying just read it, and you can come up with your own conclusions. But here's what I've got for data and math, and figure it out. So I like it's not that dogmatic. It's very open.
Yes, I think that's the best possible approach that anyone that's interested in finding solutions would take.
Yeah.
Once they can say 2 + 2 is 5, then they can do anything.
Right on. Well, thanks for coming on, Richard. We'll send you a link, and we'll put all your stuff in the show notes.
Yeah, this is a good one. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for coming on.
I very much appreciate your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. I'd love to do it again sometime.
Shout out to Buddy Clint up the road here that always seems to suggest home runs.
Yeah. Right on. All right, Richard, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks. If anything else comes up, reach out and we'll have you back.
All right. I'd like that very much. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
All right.
And that was our chat with Dr. Richard Lighthouse. The doctor?
No. Good
PhD
try.
or something? No,
Masters.
Masters. Yeah. Doctorate would be after Masters?
Yeah. Masters, then your doctorate.
I just went to trade school. It's a big old dope.
Yeah, well, you're doing well.
Yeah, I'm doing okay.
Podcasting.
I'm a fucking podcaster. Woo.
Hey,
big thank to Rich for coming on the show.
It's fun getting to chat with guys like this. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, that was fucking great.
I can't believe how many guests have this wealth of information, and I start reading it, and I'm thinking about other, different styles of electron and how mass really isn't what we thought, and matter and time, and it's pretty mind-blowing.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's fucking amazing. And it'd be interesting if they can start tying together with other things, right? It's interesting when the people that come on listen to the show, because it's almost like now I could email Richard a list of, I really think that could tie in with some of our past episodes.
Yeah, I was reading one of his ebooks, and he mentioned the electric universe quite a bit.
Well, the wall.
Yeah, like in one of his ebooks.
Yeah, Thornhill, yeah.
Yeah, but he didn't mention it specifically. He just mentioned that sort of model or that.
That was like 185, right? Oh, fuck, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, that was a good one too. What else was I going to say? Oh yeah, so definitely a good place to start is his ebooks. They're easy to download. You can even put them into your voice stream and have them read to you, but they're pretty short. They're like 7-8 minute reads. They're short little technical books, but it's interesting how he got it from Seth too, right?
I've been doing a lot more of the reading.
Have you heard of Seth?
No.
I've been wanting to get into that.
I bet you have.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
You're not into the channel books at all, eh?
No, but it's cute. Well, don't think I could read it. But you should just read it and fill us in. We could do a Seth segment.
Okay. What were you saying about you've been reading it? You've been reading more?
No. What?
You were just about to tell me you've been reading more.
No, I don't think I was going to say.
You were listening more? Something.
I don't think so. I was going to play the jingle. I was looking for the jingle that Felix sent in, but I'll save it.
Okay.
But, check out Grimerica.ca/support, guys. That's how we're able to have these chats. You don't have to put up with any ads, any bullshit. You just have to put up with us begging for money. Check out Grimerica.ca/support if you can. There's a bunch of different options. That was a shout out to our buddy Raw.
Right on.
Yeah. Check out Grimerica.ca/support, guys, if you can. There's a bunch of different options there. Check out the show notes. In every episode, there's like a bunch of other ways you can support the show that are free. Review the show, rate the show, share the show, spam gram. Is that it? Buy some swag, sign up for the newsletter.
Lots of stuff.
Tons of shit.
Okay, did you say Instagram and Twitter?
Instagram and Twitter. And Facebook. No one ever does a Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook's going down.
Think so?
Yeah.
I think I'm going to, yeah.
There's still so many people on it. Like I'm on hockey, and everybody has to text me. All my friends outside of work and the podcast
I've had some pressure
have to include me by text because I'm not on Facebook.
I've had some pressure for a Facebook group.
From who?
Facebook people. Because it's like a little mini It's almost like the Google Hangout, which is full, which we'll talk about in the intro.
It's full?
We'll talk about it in the intro.
Okay.
It's not full anymore.
Okay.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening. And we will see you next week.
Sending out good vibes. Good vibes. Good vibes. Good vibes. Good vibes.
108 breaths of deep gratitude and prayers for guidance and protection. And put on a didgeridoo and shamanic drumming track. Shivers or vibrations and stuff like that. 108 breaths of deep gratitude and prayers for guidance and protection. And put on a didgeridoo and shamanic drumming track. Shivers or vibrations and stuff like that. 108 breaths of deep gratitude and prayers for guidance and protection. And put on a didgeridoo and shamanic drumming track. Shivers or vibrations and stuff like that.
If more of you supported the show, I'd be less sick of podcasts. Grimerica/support.
Bye.